When something is bought and sold, when an asset is acquired, you typically run a due diligence to figure out what is the value of this asset. Typically, the seller will have an idea and say, it's worth 10. And then the buyer will do its due diligence and say, well, after looking after everything, we saw that we think it's actually worth 5. We're seeing a huge potential for leveraging ESG as a strategic value driver. The results of the due diligence process is also going to reveal where are the low-hanging fruits that we can take advantage of for the business strategy post-acquisition. And that's what most ESG due diligences get wrong, that they're kind of stuck in that risk assessment world.
Hello, Joachim from Green and Racing Group here, back with another episode of the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. And in this episode, I talk with Frederik van Joachim, my colleague from Green and Racing Group, on ESG due diligence, environmental, social and governance due diligence. So what are the sustainability factors you have to look into when you're buying or selling an asset, whether it's a pharma company, a production plant, or a chain of hospitals? It was super fun to do, and we've been doing some ESG due diligence projects lately, so it's also nice to be able to pass on some of the knowledge. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, and check us out at greenandracinggroup.com as well. Enjoy the episode. Frederik, welcome back to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
How are you doing today?
I'm feeling quite well. I spent yesterday evening in a sauna in Copenhagen, and that's one of my favorite places. It's like a little sanctuary. There's no screens, there's no phones. There's a lot of sweaty hippies, and I would say peace of mind in a way that I seldom have access to in my life. So I just feel very recharged and relaxed when I've been there.
Super good. We're getting you in good shape. And today we are going to talk about ESG due diligence, environmental, social and governance due diligence, which is super important for a lot of transactions. So let's take it from the top. Due diligence, what is that?
Let's take it from the very beginning. When something is bought and sold, when an asset is acquired, you typically run a due diligence to figure out what is up and down in this asset. How does it work? Which components is it composed of? And you try to figure out what is the value of this asset. Typically, the seller will have an idea and say, it's worth 10. And then the buyer will do its due diligence and say, well, after looking after everything, we saw that we think it's actually worth 5. So
so you check everything through, and
yes, it's much like when you're doing an evaluation of a house. You would say, how's the roof doing? You will do a top to toe, right? And then you'll say, how's the piping? How is the cabling? How are the walls? How is the insulation? How are the windows? How is the kitchen? How is the...
So where the seller has a real estate agent, or in this case an investment banker, whose job it is to get the deal closed and get as high a price as possible. The due diligence is the counter process, you could say, to check that everything is in order and is as stated.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting incentives at play here, right? Because the real estate agent or the investment banker has an incentive to make the deal happen first and foremost, and then secondarily at the best possible price. And a price is infinitely better than no price in that realm. So you know, on one hand, there's an engine for driving transparency and sort of evening the playing field in terms of access to knowledge. And on another side, there's also an incentive for the sell side to get the best possible price. And for that, you know, it could be convenient if they wouldn't walk down to the basement bathroom because there's a leaking pipe down there. So we're going to show them the rooftop balcony. And that's essentially a dynamic that's at play in any due diligence process. And in recent times, the environmental, social, and governance aspects have become more and more important in due diligence processes. And that's where we in Green Innovation Group help the buyers or potential buyers of a certain asset run an ESG due diligence process.
So the normal due diligence process will usually have several work streams. You will look at the commercial, how's it going with the customers or retention, the market size and growth. There will be a legal one looking, are there any liabilities, maybe a tech one, or
any litigations going on.
Yeah. And then our focus in this episode and our main focus in our work is on ESG. Let's maybe take them step by step. What do they entail and why are they important?
So ESG, environment, social, and governance. Each of them neatly and conveniently clustered into one combined category that has
all the stuff that used to not be important.
Now it's somehow important, right? And we've seen similar with environment, health, and safety in a lot of regulations. So environment is of course everything that has an influence on the environment. So typically what you're looking at here is what is the energy consumption in the asset? How are waste handling procedures carried out? Are we looking at environmental risks? Is there a chemical pollution associated to the activity in the asset? Is there asbestos in the buildings of the asset, in the real estate where the clients or the workers of the asset are present?
What are some of the particulars for healthcare here? Whether it's, it could both be for hospital treatment chains, it could be for production plants or factories, buildings, or it could be for whole pharma medtech companies.
Energy is always the usual suspect that you look at first and foremost, because it's green energy is so commoditized that it's quite easy to transition to green energy. So if you haven't transitioned to green energy in the healthcare sector, there's a very tangible how-to go into. So that would be one that's relatively obvious. Then of course there's the waste side of things. Most actors in the healthcare sector are producing what's categorized as hazardous waste. So it's hazardous either because it's medical waste, which is per definition hazardous. It can be contaminated in all different kinds of ways. It can have blood on it, it can have spit on it, it can have excrement on it or whatever. And then of course there's the sharps element that's typically present where something has been injected. So there's something that can puncture skin.
Like a needle or...
It's, like a needle. I think it will be always a needle, or almost always a needle. Or if it's surgical equipment, then it's relatively sharp and capable of doing a lot of damage. And then, of course, you have the drugs. So the actual active product ingredients that can be there in a hospital setting. It's of course part of the treatment and part of what the patient gets.
So all of these things are difficult and expensive to handle and requires a lot of different processes from if I were just a bakery and having some flour waste or yeast waste. Or,
and if I might add, they're dangerous. So they're not only difficult, they are also representing potential impact for destruction, right? And that's why it's also relatively heavily regulated in most parts of the world.
So there's a risk factor. There's a risk that if you buy an asset and the procedures and processes for handling this waste doesn't check out, there'll be a huge cost to fix it, potentially.
Yes. And then typically what you do in an ESG due diligence is you're looking at current regulation and upcoming regulation. So carbon emissions would be another aspect of the E, where the Danish government has just announced that it wants to introduce a CO2 tax of €100 per ton of CO2 emitted. And that's of course something that you have to factor in to your due diligence. Are we emitting a lot of carbon in this business? Yes, we are. Okay. What is the tax cost going to be in the future when this tax is implemented? Or what would the cost be if there's, for instance, introduced a demand for point source wastewater treatment for a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant or for a hospital?
Point source?
Point source, it means wastewater treatment at the point of the waste, the source point. So let's say that there's a demand that you need to put a filter for particle emissions. There might be a dust from whatever you're producing that you're letting into the atmosphere. You would have to put a filter on. There might be something nasty in the water, in the wastewater from the activities. Then you may have to put on either a filter or a cleansing process pre-sewage. So there's a whole range of different areas, and it's of course incredibly complex. What you can do, and I'll get into sort of some of the tools and tricks for how to choose which areas to go into, because of course you have a very short amount of time and limited resources to run these due diligence processes. So
let's talk about what an ESG process actually feels like. After we take the S and the G, so on the social side of things,
people are in our field at least are usually sort of skip jumping the S and the G because they're not the environmental parts that got people in there in the first place. So on social, what you're looking at is typically topics such as, but not limited to, diversity and inclusion in the workforce. So how is the board compensated? Do you have selection bias or recruitment biases in the organization? Do you have mechanisms that are discriminating towards certain population groups? Do you have H&R policies in place? Do you have? Are you allowed to have workers that are organized in labor unions? How many of the employed are represented by staff representatives? And, you know, these kind of things. Then you're also looking at how are workers compensated? Are they working under legal contracts? I mean, typically you would have an H&R stream, that work stream that would take care of that in a due diligence process. But if it falls on the table of the ESG work stream, that would be something you would look at. Then you would look at something like, do you have ongoing cases with corruption or with fraud or similar things? Do you have child labor? Do you have anti-child labor policies?
I'm also thinking something like access to health, if we are on the more healthcare services treatment side of things would play in here.
Yes, and that's of course a very crucial element. What kind of societal agendas are you playing into, and how is that affected? Are you only allowing for middle-aged white men to purchase your services, or are you only developing treatments with a certain category of the population in mind? So these could also be aspects you could look at.
And if we look at the governance?
The governance part is most easily understood as the extent to which policies exist in the company for all of the various areas. If those policies exist, how are they carried out? How are they structured? So also looking at how are the reporting processes? Do we actually have key performance indicators for management to perform on the ESG agenda or not? And in most cases you don't. So there's also a lot of work to be done here to say, okay, how are we actually governing this asset in a way that makes it not just compliant but also ambitious on the ESG agenda. But of course, when you're doing the due diligence, you're also looking very much at the risk profile. So say that you're in a high corruption country, or the asset is in a high corruption country. If there's not a convincing governance in place for how to avoid taking part in corruption or how to mitigate that risk, then as a buyer you should be very cautious here and have that influence your valuation of the asset.
It's probably a good point to make that here we're talking about due diligence process in a transaction, and not whether something is certified as an ESG financial asset, as a publicly listed stock that you can trade, for instance, which is of course within the same themes, but a bit of a different conundrum. But you said something very crucial there, that at least the way it used to be, this is a risk analysis at the main of it. People will say risk and benefit, but it has mainly been a risk analysis, but that has also influenced the price. So if we are in a transaction and transaction environment, what does that mean in practice, that it could influence the price?
Well, it means that on the sell side, you're of course interested in portraying the asset in a way where it looks as if there's as few visible risks as possible. And on the purchasing side.
And why is that? If we can just why a risk bad? Just if you had to explain it to a 5-year-old.
It's going to mean that you can get less for what you're trying to sell if there's a risk associated to it.
So that will be factored into the way we calculate the price of the asset.
Yes,
the risk will be part of that.
And it definitely should be, right? So let's say that you're doing the due diligence and you unravel that there's a lot of child labor going on. Well, if someone is challenging that and you're getting prosecuted, then you would have to cover the fines and the costs associated to that after purchasing the asset. So it's really important to have that in mind, that it's a risk assessment as well, where you're trying to figure out what will it cost if worst comes to worst, and we have to be liable for something that is not compliant with regulation, that something that's illegal. And the way you run this due diligence on a practical level is the very first thing you do is that you accept your faith that you're going to do a lot of work in a very short amount of time. And that's probably
take a deep breath and call your wife.
Or husband. Tell them that you're probably not coming home today. The first thing you do is run a materiality assessment, and materiality is it's a fancy way of saying important. So you're figuring out what is actually important here, and for that you put a materiality threshold, and you say everything that is worth more or less than this threshold is what we're looking at. So we're discarding anything that could potentially cost less than 10,000 euro. We're not going to spend our time looking at that.
Because the time is limited and there has to be delivered some results and some insights pretty fast.
And typically you will have a percentage of the let's say that the deal is worth 100 million euro, then you would say our materiality threshold is 0.5% of the purchase sum, or 1%, or whatever it may be. It can be anything. It comes in all shapes and sizes. So that's the first thing you do. You list up all of the different potential topics for this certain asset. If let's say that you are reviewing a hospital or a chain of hospitals, then you would say, okay, A, B, and C are the main material risks, the most important risks for this type of asset. If you're looking at a pharmaceutical company, you would be looking at these areas. If you're looking at a medtech company, you would be looking at these areas, and so on and so forth. So the materiality assessment gives you an early indication of what should be your key areas of deeper investigation here.
But also we see that, and why we chose to focus on the healthcare sector, because there's just a lot of specifics. And even within the healthcare sector, will be a lot of difference between a chain of hospitals and a pharma company, or a particular factory being sold off, but it's not the whole company, it's just the production asset.
To use a relatable metaphor, they're completely different sports, and they may not even involve balls, both of them. So it's very complex field to look at. But when you've done your materiality assessment and you've figured out, okay, we have reason to believe these are the key areas that we will have to investigate, you'll typically select a couple of them for deep dives and say, okay, now we're reviewing this pharma company. We're going to do a deep dive on the environmental pollution from the production. So how are we dealing with the production waste? And then that would be one deep dive. And then you'd say, we also see that the staff has a very high degree of part-time labor takers. Then we will have to review how does that position the asset. Can they, for instance, be challenged by the authorities that the part-time workers are in fact full-time workers? And that has certain implications for the company. And on a governance level, you're looking at the reporting structures and the KPIs for senior management or for the chief executives.
And how do you actually find these things out? Even when you decided based on analysis and our prior experience from other projects that, all right, for this pharma company, hazardous waste is probably a deep dive. How do you figure out what's actually going on?
I mean,
do you get a nice brochure from the sell side, or?
Yes, you do, but it will typically be wise to not just take that at face value. So first off, you make an educated guess, and because that's all you have time for is make an educated guess. So then you look at industry standards and industry trends, and then you say, okay, these are the things that we think are most material right now. And then during your investigation, you're constantly updating your view of the world. So that sort of leads us into the actual process. So what is it you do? You have three main ways that you access knowledge. So one is in the data room. A data room is a fancy word for folder. And it's an archive, and it's typically digital and virtual today. So you have a folder structure where all knowledge about the asset is listed in different folders. Then you have one for financial aspects, one for H&R, and one for...
And who has decided what knowledge is in there and what is
the
not?
sell side.
Yeah.
So the real estate agent or the investment banker of the sell side is guiding the management of the asset on which documents to include where, how, and when. So there's a lot of strategy and tactics here, but I won't get too deep into that. In reviewing the data room, you're looking for actual document and documentation for the things that the asset is claiming to be true, that you can actually validate whether or not that's true. And that can be something like looking for ISO certifications. So do you have certifications that your environmental health and safety policies are certified by this standard? Is your waste handling processes certified by this standard? What are the energy classes of the different real estate assets in there? What is the power consumption? How is it purchased from whom, and what is the vehicle fleet, and all of these things that are documented.
I always find that process so interesting to go and see, okay, this is what it says in the fancy PowerPoint, which is often very similar to the things that are written on the website. That we are sustainable. We are, and then okay, so how do we actually verify this? How do we dig in? And then it doesn't mean that it's all fluff. There can usually be a lot of good things in there also, but how to bridge the gap between the sales material world and the real world is
and the documentation world.
Yeah.
That's actually what it's a lot about this problem about what are you going to take at face value, right? Because you could just read the sustainability report and assume everything in there is true. But that's not running a due diligence, that's reading a report. So the due diligence would be fact-checking everything that's put into that report and asking them for the sources that can document the statements made in the report.
And the interesting thing here is that it can turn both ways, that you can have something where it's not documented because the processes weren't there, but the reality was actually on a high performance in terms of the ERDS or the G, or you can have something where it is documented and it's supposed to look nice, but the reality is not there. So it's also not a given, for instance, that just because the documentation is not there, the reality, and that's
and vice versa, and that's why there's really no there's no real shortcuts here. You have to do the work. And then the second source of information is to go to the physical locations of the asset. So what's called site visits. And at the site visit, let's say you go to that pharma manufacturing plant and you see that there's a pipe with a suspiciously looking liquid that's running straight into the Mekong River in Asia. Maybe that's something you would like to review and ask how you're sampling the wastewater before you're releasing it into nature, or that black smoke coming out through that chimney over there, how you're filtering that on site.
I can see the factory workers are lifting these heavy loads all by themselves.
Are they carrying heavy stuff off of the floor, or how they're pushing things, and all of these things that, I mean, I'm an anthropologist by training, and in Green Innovation Group, when we do site visits, we have anthropologists that go out there and see more than what you see. It's also a way of what's the culture there. Well, what's the way the humans are actually interacting? Do we see a representation of ethnic and gender groups in both on the customer side, but also on the staff side, and what kind of positions are minorities taking in the company?
Just how does the workforce look and feel? And this is one of many places we can expand later on, where I think that a good ESG due diligence should create a lot of commercial value. Yes, for instance, on these site visits, because I mean, you're not going to have any company website that doesn't say that our employees are one of the top priorities, and we work together as a team. And,
well, good for you.
And thankfully, many companies do. It's a pretty good industry on a lot of things, but you have to go see yourself.
Yeah, and it's just, and it's also, it's the non-curated, non-edited view on the world. And if you're on a site visit, I mean, take a left turn when you're not necessarily allowed, and see what's not part of that sort of orchestrated, polished reality that the sell side is trying to show you. Try and see if you can get some of the dirty secrets out there. Look for the cracks in the floor. Are the light bulbs actual LED when they're claimed to be? Is the air conditioning all on? Are the lights automatic or not? Is the air conditioning system turned on with windows open? All of these kind of things that they will not file in the report.
And this is also why we will often also do mystery shopping. So besides if we're granted any official guided site visits, we do try to tend to show up unannounced.
And as you're allowed to, as a normal person in society or a citizen, you're allowed to show up certain places and just be there, until you're told nicely to go away. But I mean, you can always look at the asset and the site from outside of the fence. You can look at Google Maps, satellite footage, and these kind of things. And then, of course, the third and last main way of obtaining information is the expert interviews. So typically, the sell side will organize limited access to certain experts. So that, of course, will be the buying side will be interested in interviewing the CEO and the CFO of the asset, because they're probably going to stay there at least for a while. And then on an ESG side, you'll want to talk to someone representing real estate, someone representing H&R. You'll probably want to talk to someone representing legal in a way. You'll want to talk to someone who's representing the employees, and you'll want to talk to someone who's representing environment in one way or another, or whoever's doing the waste disposal, for instance. They'll be key personnel to interview, and that comes in. Sometimes you can have very little access to experts. Sometimes you can have a lot or almost unlimited access. So it comes in all shapes and sizes, depending on sort of the style of the real estate agent or the investment banker on the sell side.
Yeah, there's both that, but there's also where it's one of these areas where experience comes to show that, again, you shouldn't take it at face value. That it's quite often that the investment bank would say, well, you can only talk to these two people.
Yeah.
Okay, and say, that's good, but that's not enough.
Yeah.
Or if that's what you're saying, that we can only talk to these people too, then you should just know that then we can only write this in the due diligence.
And it's funny because in a democratized world, it's a very sort of locked-in process, right? You have typically a questions and answers sheet that's going back and forth, where the investment bankers on both sides are kind of gatekeepers that have this artifact document where it's saying like, we want to see a list of how many full-time and part-time employees you have. Then the sell side goes back and says, okay, puts that file in there and puts a document in the data room and lists, this is where you find that file. Okay, and then they bring that list to the other investment banker, and that investment banker is bringing that to the work stream on the purchasing side, and then you're kind of going through these double-gated communication streams that are incredibly inefficient, but also very controlled. So there's a very high degree of information control in this process.
You can create a good sustainability strategy and good sustainability procedures creates a lot of value beforehand if you are an asset owner. I mean, which all of our clients are in one way or another, because there's a lot of difference between having your things in order and then being able to put them in upon request in the data room or otherwise in this relatively short time frame, or having to sort of create those things on the spot. And it is one of, it's a bit like buying the house. I mean, if you start to see that the floor is a bit rotten somewhere, your alarm bell starts to ring off, and you say, "Okay, we have to go a lot deeper." So even outside of the particular due diligence process, as an asset owner, having your things in order will likely also increase the value of them, because there's less risk to be found, and there is also, whenever something doesn't look right, the answer is to dig more, not less.
And then, there's a whole range of different dynamics at play, but essentially the reason why we find ESG due diligence projects very interesting is because we're seeing a huge potential for leveraging ESG as a strategic value driver, and that's something that's seen very seldom, and something where the results of the due diligence process is also going to reveal where are the low-hanging fruits that we can take advantage of for the business strategy post-acquisition. So after the house has been bought, what is it we need to do in order to actually improve in these areas, in order to make us more attractive as a business partner or as a service provider in the long run? And that's what most ESG due diligences get wrong, that they're kind of stuck in that risk assessment world and not in strategic leverage for the future of the business.
Yeah, and we have actively decided that we will not only do that. We will, of course, do the risk analysis, so everything is in order. But if we're hired to only do the risk analysis, we don't create enough value. We need to be able to build for the future because we have some climate goals to reach, and just putting check marks at stuff.
There's a lot of accountants that are much better suited to do that than us. Yeah. So our value creation also comes sort of on top of that. So doing the risk assessment and then doing the strategic planning and the roadmap for a more sustainable future. That's what's exciting.
Yeah. So that is basically, should you buy this company or this asset, what does the next 1, 3, and 5 years look like? How do we create value? How does it generate more revenue for you? Better treatment can be a part of your sustainability strategy.
Can you provide better access to treatments? Can you provide access to underserved groups of the population? Can you meet and stimulate unmet medical needs? You know, there's a whole bunch of agendas in there that should be leveraged as sort of the next step after the due diligence process.
What would you say is most important regarding ESG due diligence?
The most important thing about ESG due diligence is that it's leveraged strategically after the conclusion of the initial due diligence and the risk assessment. Then you figure out how can we improve the business long term by responding to some of the findings here.
Yeah, so you should already in the due diligence process not just do the risk analysis, but see how can we strategically create value.
Look for future opportunities and value drivers, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. It was super fun to do, and nice to consolidate some of our knowledge from the projects. If you're interested to hear more episodes, check out some of the others and subscribe on Spotify or Apple. And check us out at greenandracinggroup.com as well, where you can also download some of our reports and white papers. Thank you for listening in, and have a great day.